Well, folks, the results are in as far as 2025 at the superhero box office. We've had four films that have come out. Captain America Brave New World, Fantastic Four First Steps, Thunderbolts, and the start of the DCU with Superman. And the picture is not real pretty as far as how superhero movies are doing. While none of these are outright embarrassing films like Morbius or Catwoman, where the box office is just ridiculously low, there is one huge trend that seems to be going across all of these superhero movies, and that is that they are not what they used to be. When you look at the numbers on it, especially with the hype behind these, and that you have Superman, the start of the DCU, one of the largest characters in fiction. You have the Fantastic Four with all the hype that was brought to that. You had the Thunderbolts, which they even tried the whole new Avengers thing. You had Captain America, whereas most folks refer to him as Falcon, and all the hype of that. And yet none of these movies were really breakout hits with folks. And so I think you can kind of look at this as this was a huge year for superhero movies. And it's really hard to pretend that this is anything other than a failure as far as these properties are just not hitting the way that they used to. And so I think it's time to kind of look at honestly where superhero movies are, figure out how some of this could change or if it's ever going to change, and just sort of ask the question, are superhero movies dying? In that, when you really look at it, I think this is an interesting year, and that 2024 was a different year for superhero films, and that you really only had Deadpool and Wolverine. And that's dealing with a Fox franchise, had a 20-year history with two characters that everybody loved. It wasn't really connected to anything that exists currently. It was connected to past stuff. And it was a huge hit. But even that one, it wasn't at the level that it used to be. And most people chalk that up to it's an R-rated film, and that's why it figured to finish a little bit lower. This year, you had three franchises with the MCU that they really pushed, three franchises that they were banking on to succeed, because when you see the promos for Avengers Doomsday, a lot of what they were teasing was a team led by Falcon, Captain America, the new Avengers, and the Fantastic Four, and all of those movies appear to be set to lose Marvel money for this year. And I think what's interesting is, all of those films, I didn't dislike any of them. I thought Captain America Brave New World was very meh. It wasn't great. I actually really liked Thunderbolts. I really liked Fantastic Four. But when you look at it, Captain America Brave New World's estimated that it lost Marvel at least $100 million. Thunderbolts is also estimated to have lost Marvel about $100 million. And Fantastic Four, I think they had a 66% second weekend drop and will most likely lose money for Marvel. I think even when you pivot to DC, Superman, and there's differing numbers on how much money it needs to make or anything like that. It definitely seems that that movie is going to make less money than Man of Steel did in 2013. And Man of Steel is not exactly one of the most beloved films of all time, or one that was without controversy, and that quite a few people disliked that when it came out. And so I think it is time to look at, do superhero movies really have a future, and what are some steps that might help superhero films? Now, there are folks who will kind of make excuses for why superhero movies are doing worse. And I do think there is a fraction of a percentage of some of that going on that's causing it. So, one of the common ones you hear, well, the pandemic changed everybody's habits. And I do think there is some legitimacy to that. I do think people are more resistant to go to films than they used to be. I think the pandemic kind of got us all used to watching things at home. Movies really lost their prominence in that. I'll say this myself. I used to go to probably 20 or so movies a year, or I would see films multiple times. And so about once every 2 weeks, I'd be at the movie theater. This year I went more than I normally do, but I've only been 6 or 7 times. And I have no plans on really seeing anything else the rest of the year. I might go see, a movie here or there, but at most it'd be 10 times that I go, which is about half of what it used to be. And so some of that is simply just look, home entertainment is better than it used to be with all the streaming services. Also, the movies are hitting these streaming services faster. And I do think that has an effect, but I don't think it's why these movies are losing more money. In that, what defeats that is the fact that Spider-Man No Way Home made 1.9 billion, Avatar made over 2 billion, Deadpool and Wolverine was over a billion, Top Gun Maverick was over $1 billion, Barbie made over $1 billion, Mario made over $1 billion. And so to say that these superhero movies are not making what they used to simply because of that doesn't seem to work. It seems to be more of a bad faith argument, and that all of those movies generated enough interest to get people to go into the theaters and watch it. And again, some of those even feature superheroes, but I think that doesn't really stand up as an excuse. I think the other thing that you will hear from some folks, you have the pandemic. You also have people who say, well, just movies are too expensive now. And I agree that they are. I do think that is a more accurate assessment of why some of these are losing some of the money. I don't think it's why a movie makes 400 million instead of 1.3 billion, but I do think that does hurt. And that, look, about 10 years ago when superhero movies were coming out, um, I would typically go see superhero movies I liked 2 to 3 times easily. In some cases, if it was a great James Bond movie or a great Batman movie, I would probably see it 4 or 5 times. And I think the superhero movies kind of got used to having people where it's like opening weekend was you'd go see it Friday and you'd go see it Sunday and then you'd be back multiple times. And I think it has shifted for some folks where yeah, you'll go see it once. If you loved it, you might go see it twice. But those fifth, sixth, seventh viewings that some people used to do for these things, I just don't think most folks can afford that anymore. And so I do think there is an effect to that. Again, I don't think it's enough to get us from where we are, though, to where these things used to be. And so I do think you have to look at what is causing that, and that to have all of these films, even with major characters, because that was another excuse folks had. Well, it's an Ant-Man movie, it's the Marvels, it's the Eternals, it's Shang-Chi. It doesn't really work when you have the branding of Superman or the branding of the Fantastic Four or Captain America behind it, even though it's not, the Captain America most people know. And so, or the only Captain America, to be honest. So I think what we really have to look at is why are these movies not doing as well as they used to? Why are they failing to generate? And I think there's really three huge causes to that. And first and foremost, I think it simply is fatigue. I think what it is, a lot of times, and I was one who thought this, I thought maybe it's just bad movie fatigue, right? Because they were putting out some really poor movies. But when you really look at it, we do get tired of certain things. Western movies were the dominant form of entertainment for a very long time. Epic movies before that were huge. The Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, that kind of stuff. People loved those sort of films. But after a while, when you've seen it 50 times, 60 times, you kind of get bored of it. And I think that's the thing is Western movies, a lot of people used to love those, but you can only shape a Western story so many ways before people look and go, okay, the lone drifter's gonna walk into town. There's a corrupt sheriff and a poor woman who needs help, and the gunslinger's gonna help, or the anti-hero is gonna go in and do it. And so after you've seen those plots 40, 50, 60 times, you do get to a point where it's kind of like, I don't really know if I need to go see this one, or I've seen it before. And again, much like Westerns, you will have your diehard fans, like most comic book fans, who will be there for opening day to go see the movie, or will check it out in theaters. But the mainstream, huge, kind of normie audience that you need to take these things from 500 million to 1.5 billion, I think a lot of them, unless you're putting something truly special out, like No Way Home with 3 Spider-Mans, or like Deadpool and Wolverine, they're just not going to show up. Or they'll show up once, but not multiple times. Or they'll show up to one of the movies, but not all 3 of the movies. And I think you're starting to see that have its effect. There is fatigue of superheroes in that. Look, the diehard fans who love this stuff will see a Fantastic Four thing, the same way that we'll go pick up monthly issue of Spider-Man, and we don't care how many times he's fought the Green Goblin. If you do it well, we'll read the 65th time that Peter clashes with Norman Osborn because we love the characters. But the normie audience that needs to be there for these things to make money, it's just not there anymore. And I think much like cowboy movies, much like Western films, epic films, romantic comedies, there's their day. They had their day, and people have kind of moved on. And so you do have a core audience that will always be there, but it's not going to be what it was, where it's just packed cinemas of cheering fans. I think so much of that has just ended. And I don't think there's anything they can do to really get that back on a consistent basis. And that, yeah, if they make the Batman 2 really, really well and it does great, could that crack $1 billion? Sure. And maybe the third one then would be really anticipated the way that it did 10 years ago. And so I think it's time to kind of accept that a lot of the general audience has sort of moved on from superhero films. Not completely, but it's never going to be what it was. I think the second thing that is hurting this is I think there's a tendency with any film franchise, with anything, to look back at the past and realize that you've seen it done better. And that makes it really hard to like what you're seeing now. And that what's interesting is I really enjoyed Fantastic Four. I enjoyed Thunderbolts. I enjoyed Superman. But all of those movies, they're not the greatest superhero film of all time because we've seen it before. It's interesting is that like my wife is kind of what I would define as a normie fan. She can identify Marvel, DC, that kind of thing. But she's not a huge fan of superheroes and that she's not really a comic book reader or anything like that, other than she's married to me, so it's a larger part of her life than most folks. But one of the things is, even for her who doesn't watch all these things, she'll watch the movies and she'll go like, "Oh, that was just like this one, but it wasn't as good." So, for instance, the other night, me and her watched Thunderbolts, and she enjoyed the movie. But the first thing she said after that, she's like, "Oh, that was kind of exactly like Guardians of the Galaxy. It was just on Earth instead of in space." And what she was really hinting at is, it's again, how many times can we watch a group full of, people who have different personalities, who don't like each other, who come together and find a found family sort of thing at the end? We've seen it happen multiple times. The Avengers has done that sort of storytelling. The Guardians of the Galaxy has done that sort of storytelling. Suicide Squad did that sort of storytelling. And so, yeah, when you have a movie like that, there's a lot of folks where it's like, yeah, I've seen this done and I've seen it done better. Right. And I think that again is part of what killed other genres, right? When you had Western movies, the Clint Eastwood Westerns are all considered classics because it's Clint Eastwood. But as time moved on and you started making movies where Eastwood wasn't doing Westerns anymore and you were still rolling those out, people would look back and go, yeah, it's just like the Clint Eastwood ones. It's just not as good because Clint Eastwood's not in it. And I think overall, that is what is really hurting a lot of these movies. And that, one of the experiences that I will always remember is, I took my son to see the movie Black Adam. Now, I like Black Adam. I think it's a great movie. I know a lot of people hate it. If you hate it, I get it. I'm not saying it's a good movie. I just personally enjoy the heck out of that movie. I think it's a lot of fun. But it's not by no means a perfect movie or a great movie. I think it's a bad movie I enjoy. But what was so interesting is my son is a huge Marvel fan. He's not a big DC guy. And as we were watching the movie, the entire time he was seeing these DC heroes, the first thing out of his mouth when he was seeing the movie, when Hawkman showed up, he's like, "Oh, it's kind of exactly like Falcon, just with a mace." And then when Doctor Fate showed up, he's like, "Oh, that's just Doctor Strange." When Atom Smasher showed up, it's like, "That's Ant Man." And when the Cyclone lady showed up in the movie, he's like, "Oh, that's kind of like Storm." And I think that's the thing is for a lot of these folks, even when you present something new, that's new characters, they do look back and go like, "Nah, I've seen this done. I know what this is." And I think overall that's really hard to get past because people look and they see things and go, "No, it's not, what it used to be." And so I think superhero movies, it's kind of time to just admit that we've seen all of these stories before on the big screen. And for a lot of the audience, again, us normies out there, or us hardcore fans will go see it. The normies, I think, are kind of done with it though, and have gotten to that point where it's like, how many times am I going to see this story over and over again? And I do think it's time to maybe look at that and say, okay, this is why these are making less money, why it's not going to bounce back. I think lastly, I think it is time for Marvel and DC to get some fresh new voices in there. And what I mean is, I think from running the studio portion of things, I think DC made a mistake in adding James Gunn as the guy who runs it, and that James Gunn is an MCU guy, and I think he's going to try to do, hey, this worked at Marvel Studios and try to do that sort of thing. I don't think that's necessarily going to work. And I certainly think Kevin Feige probably needs to be let go from Marvel. I think when you look at something, I think we have to get people in to make these movies. And I think maybe getting people who are more attached to the comic books and just want to make niche comic book films with lower budgets that really appeal to comic book fans and hope that something like that. Because I think what we're seeing right now is, no matter how successful some of these folks were in the past, there's times where things just move past you. And I think for like Kevin Feige, it's probably time, much like when you watch a baseball game where the manager comes out and takes the ball from the pitcher, where it's like, hey man, it's time. Like you did good, just it's done. And I think that might be the case for Kevin Feige, and maybe James Gunn can turn DC around. But I think he's even sort of the same problem in that you have these folks who have been doing this for a really long time, and I think they're addicted to trying to make superhero movies the way they've always been made the last 20 years. And I think people are past that. These escalating budgets, and I think the tone of this snarky sort of humor and stuff like that that's been in there, I think people have seen it and they're just sort of done with it. And again, it's weird to say that in that, like, Kevin Feige is probably the most successful producer in the history of movies. But in all honesty, at a certain point, it is time for you to go. When you look at real life examples of this, and I talk sports on here a lot. Bill Belichick of the Patriots is the most successful NFL head coach of all time. 6 Super Bowls, and I believe 18 years from 2000 to 2018, he won 6 Super Bowls. One of the greatest coaches, if not the greatest coach of all time. And yet, 6 years after that sixth Super Bowl in 2024, the Patriots fired him. And it was because he wasn't getting the job done anymore. And again, it doesn't take away from the greatness that he had over those 18 years where they won 6 Super Bowls. But in 2024, the Patriots were like, look, man, the game is past you. And I think that's what we're seeing with Feige and some of these other ones. And I think DC, Peter Safran and James Gunn come from DC and Marvel Studios, respectively. And I think the thing is, it's probably just time to say, hey, you know what, we need either fresh new folks who can come in and make these movies for 25, 50, 75 million dollars, but this over reliance on CGI, snarky humor, that kind of stuff, the things that are being integrated into these films, I think because it's been done so much, people are kind of tired of it. And I think even, Superman was such an interesting movie for this year, and that, like, I on the surface, I liked the film, but it was a James Gunn movie, and I've seen it 3 times before with Guardians of the Galaxy. And I think that's sort of what people are seeing, is that, we've seen this stuff before. And it's hard to make anything new when you have the same sort of voices and creatives and people in there. And that when you really look at it, can I blame audiences for maybe not being as engaged with Robert Pattinson's Batman when there was Christian Bale Batman and Michael Keaton Batman and Ben Affleck Batman all in the last 10 years reappearing on screen? We have 4 Batmans. In the last 20 years, we've had 3 Spider-Mans. We've had multiple versions of so many of these heroes, and so many of these storylines have happened over and over again, that I think it might be just the point where people look and go like, hey man, yeah, I'm not going to rush out and see that. I've seen it. And, I think much like the Western films, like John Wayne's classics and Clint Eastwood's classics, we had our sort of golden age of superhero movies. Iron Man and The Dark Knight in 2008, those movies that set up this entire huge genre of epic storytelling. And I know there were movies before that, but that year, 2008, while there was Spider-Man that was really successful in 2002, when that year happened in 2008, you had this just seismic event that happened on both the Marvel and the DC thing, where it blew up these superhero franchises. And it was a great year for comic fans, and we really got, 10 to 12 years of great storytelling from it, better from Marvel than DC. But I think once Tony Stark snapped and Christian Bale sort of tipped his glass at the end of The Dark Knight Rises, that's probably the high. Dark Knight Rises was the high point of DC ending, and Iron Man's, I am Iron Man, snap at the end was probably the high point in the end for the MCU. And I think it's probably just time to realize that these things, they're cyclical. Us hardcore fans, we'll still have these things. We can still watch them. We can still enjoy them, but it's not going to be what it was before. And so I think they need to change the way they're making these. It's probably time to push some of these folks who have been making these films and tell them, hey, man, great job, but it's done. We need people who come in and make these cheaper or make them more comic accurate or something like that. And then I think what we've had is just not working anymore. Because even when the movies aren't bad, I think this year, I think all the movies were okay. I think Falcon and the Winter or Captain America: Brave New World was by far the worst, but Thunderbolts, Fantastic Four, Superman, those were all really good movies. Didn't resonate with folks. They're making less money than Man of Steel and Suicide Squad and movies that aren't even beloved from 13 years ago. And that's not even in just adjusting those for inflation, where they'd be $200 or $300 more than they were. And so I think, everybody has their heyday. There's really only a few franchises that really are able to stand the test of time. I think in hindsight, I mean, it makes the James Bond franchise so impressive, in that you talk about 60 years that Bond has largely been able to be a dominant box office force that always connects with folks, going from Connery to Craig. And I think that franchise really stands out on its own because it's been able to reinvent itself so many times and do things well. It's just I don't think superhero movies are going to have the ability to do that. And so it's probably just time to say goodbye as far as assuming these things are ever going to be back, so to speak. I think there'll always be superhero movies. They'll always make a few, but if they keep losing 100 million, 150 million, 200 million on these things, we ain't going to get them for much longer. And while I'll be sad that those go, it's cyclical. And it'll be kind of like, my dad loves Western movies. It'll kind of be like that, where he used to, as a kid, he used to get those all the time, watch them all the time. Now he's thrilled when he gets one or two that are really well done, and he's happy about it. But I think as far as these things being the box office dominant thing, it's done. And like the Douglas Adams Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it's one of those so long that thanks for all the fish kind of things, and that it's great. Superhero movies did really, really well for 20 years. It's fantastic. They were more successful than I ever thought they would be as a hardcore comic book fan. But I do think it's time to kind of admit that superhero movies, for us as the diehards, will still love them, but they're not coming back as the dominant force. And just because we get a Spider-Man movie here or a Batman movie there that cracks $1 billion, these aren't coming back. And it's sad, but I think it's just inevitable, and I think it's here, and it'll be interesting to see what the future of this is. But I think we are this year, to me, kind of clinches that the superhero movie has had its time. This was the chance to sort of reinvent it. It's not gonna come back. Do I think they'll have a good year next year? Sure. It's a Spider-Man movie and an Avengers movie. They might both crack $1 billion. But I think that will only mean good things for those movies and will be no more relevant than saying that, hey, because a Top Gun movie made 1.5 billion, that, the next Tom Cruise movie is going to make that. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that isolated film does well. But I think the shared cinematic universes of blockbusters are all. But let me know, what do you guys think down below? Do you think this year was kind of the final strike at the superhero movie ever really coming back? I certainly think that it was, but if you disagree or think I'm incorrect, let me know down below. I'll never pretend to be the expert, just one guy with his opinions for today. As always, folks, thank you guys so much for watching. God bless you. Hope you have a great rest of your day.